statement about the fact about interpretation. Due to how quickly this event came together, we were not able to find an ASL interpreter who was available to be present today. However, we will make a video recording of this event and provide an ASL interpretation, which will then be posted on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. We will make the link available on our social media platforms as well. Today, we're announcing a new lawsuit filed this morning against the Department of Social Services over the failure of the governor and the legislature to address ongoing financial eligibility discrimination against people with disabilities in the state's Medicaid program, in violation of the state's equal protection constitutional provision, which expressly prohibits discrimination on the basis of, quote, physical or mental disability, close quote. Here is the stark discrimination. There are three main Medicaid programs: Husky A, C, and D. For a single adult under Husky A and D, which is for non-disabled, non-elderly people, the income limit is $1,800 per month. Husky C, however, which is for severely disabled individuals as well as people 65 and older, has an income limit of only $1,370 a month. So it's a $430 a month express discrimination. You're going to hear from speakers today, including a representative from the legislature, an affected individual, a person about to be affected by the discrimination, and some of the folks who have been working on this issue for 4 years. First, I'm pleased to introduce Representative Ann Hughes, who's on the Human Services Committee, who's here to talk somewhat about what's going on.
Thank you. I'm the State Representative Ann Hughes. Like Sheldon said, I want to thank the Disability Rights Connecticut. I want to thank the Yale Medical Legal Clinic, and I want to thank the plaintiffs for bringing us to account for our discriminatory laws. And you know, we're in partnership with the public. I am on Human Services, and it is our mission to dismantle the discriminatory systemic framework that are vestiges of when people with disabilities were, up until the 70s, involuntarily sterilized, were institutionalized, restricted civil liberties, and we have normalized and kept the status quo of some of those laws and policies. One of which is requiring extreme poverty for people with disabilities and elderly to access life-saving Medicaid. Extreme poverty. We already require poverty, $1,800 a month, to be eligible for Husky A and D. But we require additional extreme poverty of income levels in order for people with disabilities to qualify for life-saving health coverage by the state that they need. This is punitive, this is cruel, it is discriminatory, and it is indeed harmful. And if we didn't have this lawsuit against the government, you know, and I'm a lawmaker, then we would have no way to kind of reconcile what we have inherited. When we hear about the extreme harm and cruelty that this is doing, the first thing I hear from my colleagues is, well, that wasn't me. I wasn't here when that law was made up. Well, we're here now, and it is our job together to dismantle the harms once we understand the human cost and the impact. And we do have a few measures right now, and we've had them before, in eliminating some of the asset limits and phasing out some of the asset limits. Again, we require people with disabilities to be extremely poor to quote unquote deserve state-sponsored health care. And that is wrong, it is immoral, and it's left over from a legacy of dehumanization of people with disabilities. And it is long overdue that we end this discrimination. And we did pass a law, and then we pulled it back to bring people with disabilities up to the same income limits as non-disabled. But it is, I think, a leftover from a time when we didn't see people with disabilities as fully human. And we don't have a mechanism to reconcile our legacy because we just want a distance from it. Well, I say today we end that distance and we hold ourselves accountable together as a state, as a legislature, and as a community. So thank you.
Woo! Thank you so much, Representative Hughes. And I should say, reference that the discrimination is beyond what we're bringing the case in this lawsuit. This is about the income eligibility discrimination, but also in the Medicaid program, there's direct discrimination on the assets. Only people with severe disabilities and who are 65 or older have any asset limit, and it's very low, $1,600. It's all the savings you can have. Keeping them poverty.
Extreme poverty.
Exactly.
Require extreme poverty.
And Husky A and D do not require that. Now, I'd like to introduce somebody who's very brave, somebody who is one of the plaintiffs in this lawsuit, Laura Garrico from Clinton, and she's going to say a few words.
Woo! Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Today I stand before you to share my personal journey, one that highlights the troubling reality in our healthcare system here in Connecticut. As a person living with disabilities, specifically multiple sclerosis, I have faced significant challenges that have been exacerbated by the state's health policies. I want to talk about a critical issue, discrimination against individuals with disabilities in accessing necessary health care. Due to my disability, I rely on Social Security disability insurance. However, I find myself caught in a frustrating paradox. My SSDI payment is just $76 above the asset limit for the state's healthcare program, Husky C, and as a result, I am ineligible for coverage that I desperately need. When the COVID-related protections ended, I lost my Husky C coverage, leaving me to rely solely on Medicare. While Medicare is a vital resource, it does not provide the comprehensive care that individuals like myself require. In my case, I lost my balance due to my condition, resulting in 2 cracked front teeth. For 2 long years, I lived with pain, embarrassment, and unable to access dental care. Finally, I was able to secure care credit through my dentist. This came with a hefty price of $4,000. With my limited income, I now face mounting late fees each month, further complicating my already precarious financial situation. It is essential to recognize that this is not just my story. It is the story of many individuals with disabilities who find themselves in similar situations or worse. We are not asking for special treatment for others to be denied care. Rather, we are advocating for fairness and the right to access the health care that we need to live with dignity and health. The current system discriminates against those of us who need better health care coverage the most. It is time to address these disparities and ensure that all individuals, regardless of their disability status, have access to the health care they require. Let us work together to end this discrimination and advocate for the health care system that truly supports everyone, especially those most vulnerable. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Ruth Miglietti, who is with the Center for Disability Rights, not to be confused with disability rights, but I think it's confused all the time. Rick is going to, he's an advocate, but he's also going to talk from his personal perspective.
Yeah, well, I can just move it. It's fine.
People with disabilities cause all kinds of problems.
Not a problem at all.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
So, thank you. Good morning and thank you. My name is Rick Miglietti. As Sheldon said, I work for the Center for Disability Rights. 25 years ago, John Rowland was my hero, along with Representative Bill Dyson and Senator Christie. Each of them introduced a bill to allow people with disabilities to go to work and remain eligible for Medicaid. It was the Medicaid for the Employee Disabled. Back then, over the years, the names of the program have changed. That program went into effect October of 2000, and I've been working since October 2nd of 2000 for the past 25 years for the Center for Disability Rights. As we all know, 2 years ago, a bill was passed increasing the income and asset limits for the Husky C program. Governor Lamont, the following year before it was implemented, decided to write in legislation to take it away. How evil is that? Today I'm asking Governor Lamont not to be a zero, to be my hero again, and allow people on Husky C to have the same income and asset limits as everybody else on Husky D. We are the people who need it the most. That is why that lawsuit is being filed today, because he failed to do that. He was successful in appealing. I don't understand why he's got a thing against people with disabilities. We work hard. People are 65. They worked hard and pay taxes all of their lives. When they turn 65 and now need Medicaid, the governor says, no, you got to have your income roughly around $1,300 a month. If I stop working tomorrow, I lose my Medicaid for employee disabled, and I'm forced to go on the regular Husky C guidelines, which means my asset limit will be $1,600. My income limit will be roughly $1,200–1,300 a month, or I won't qualify for the program. What was my incentive to go to work for this past 25 years, I ask you? There isn't, other than hoping that something was going to change. Well, for the past 4 years, we were unsuccessful with the legislature to get it passed, because the governor keeps taking it away. So this is why what we have to do is with disabilities. It's ridiculous. It's just unfair. It's against our law and our protection clause. So that's why we have to do this today.
Thank you, Rick. And next, my colleague, Shara, in Disability Rights Connecticut. We are two of the plaintiffs' lawyers.
Good morning. I'm Gina Texera. I was not involved in the 4 years of advocacy work that was done trying to get this issue resolved without litigation, but we have a strong legal claim, and so here we are. We've been forced to bring a legal action because we have a strong legal case, and you have a situation where it's harder to get health insurance if you have a disability, right? And it shouldn't be that way, really. It should be the opposite. It should be easier to get health insurance under our state program and our state eligibility criteria. But this, at a minimum, it should be the same. In fairness, we think justice requires that the eligibility criteria would be the same for a person with a disability and a person without. And because it's not, and it's much, much more difficult to get health care under the Husky program, we brought this legal action to address that injustice. Thank you. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Gina. And now we have CJ joining us, one of the advocates who's been working on this issue for, like Rick said, 4 years. He's going to tell, sorry?
Seems like a decade.
Seems like, yeah. He's going to tell you a little bit more about what this is. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm CJ, lead organizer for Black and Brown United in Action and daughter to an elderly disabled immigrant. I am grateful to be amongst and in solidarity with all of you who are able to come out here today. Shout out to the many comrades, community members, and allies who are unable to be. Thank you to my peers, Laura and Rick, for sharing their lived experiences and providing much needed recognition of unspoken issues and peer support. As you know, Rick, Sheldon, Kathy, Nancy, and those of us who started this journey to end healthcare access discrimination 4 years ago share my angst in recognizing that in 2025 that we are still reminded that those in power and privilege, that a reduction in discrimination is still discrimination. Unfortunately, not everyone could be here, not because they did not want to be, but because they might be on hold right now, hoping to finally to get onto someone from Social Security, or patiently trying to strategize their transportation, or hoping to mentally heal and afford a few appointments with a therapist, or where they can lay their head tonight. Or they might be busy trying to figure out, on top of all of that, how they can afford health care. Imagine, on top of all of that, you are perceived as seen. So if your disability is not visible to some, then it doesn't exist. Similarly, if you're an active elder, it somehow means you do not need medical resources because you seem functional. We all anticipate growing older for the most part, but do we even really know what it costs to age? Are we living in a time when we can afford to think about retiring, Rick, and being elderly, right? What happens when we want to live independently but cannot afford the resources? Who cares when you cannot make it to your doctor's appointment because you do not have medical transportation, or you need assistance with your basic living needs? Here's something else to consider. According to data published by the CDC July 2024, more than 1 in 4 adults, approximately 28.7% in the U.S., will have some type of disability. 13.9% of U.S. adults a cognition disability with serious difficulty concentrating, remembering, or making decisions. 12% about will have a mobility disability with serious difficulty walking or climbing stairs. So what did we just learn? Well, I don't know about you, but that reminded me that when I get older and I have needs, and the probability of having a disability is reasonably high, but how either is perceived and accepted is another conversation, and that's why we're here. And while the millionaire in power can afford to age and accommodate himself and his family comfortably, the poor and those without power and privilege have to hope they can afford even the slightest bit of healthcare access before their DIE. Sadly, healthcare access for the disabled and elderly was not a priority before, during, and now after COVID. In the midst of a worldwide healthcare pandemic, the disabled and elderly communities were not a priority, much less a consideration. One would think those with power and privilege would have learned and decided that having survived a worldwide pandemic, one of the many takeaways would be that the disabled and elderly people need to have healthcare access and should not be required to meet obligations beyond their capacity. Instead, we're less than a priority. Healthcare became profit-driven, and many communities, including the disabled and elderly, just don't exist anymore to them. Through the years, this alliance has made several attempts, as many times, for people to be put before profit and for the needs of the disabled and elderly community to be fully acknowledged and effectively resolved. Healthcare is now so profit-driven, it would be no surprise if calling your doctor to schedule an appointment gets invoiced. In a time when healthcare resources, not limited to mental and medical wellness, should be accessible and affordable, too many can't even afford the thought of scheduling an appointment with their primary care physician or therapist to talk about it all, because they have to choose between their health, food, or shelter. In 2023, having been made aware of the harmful discrimination in our laws against the disabled and older adults in our Medicaid program, the legislature voted to end income eligibility discrimination amongst them once and for all. Well, we had a win in 2023 for like 5 seconds. It was short-lived and snatched away in 2024, right before it could take effect October 1st, 2024. The governor insisted it was necessary to honor the fiscal handcuffs. Love the commitment to policing. We wrote letters, sent petitions, and after several attempts to appeal to the governor and end discrimination, we stood outside his mansion asking him to show empathy, compassion, and understanding for those whose voices have and continue to be silenced. They don't ask for a lot, just an opportunity to be recognized and respected. Let me tell you something. Discrimination, when ignored, it evolves. It becomes commonplace, a way of life. Ego and agenda are the oppressor's favorite tools and thrives where there is no empathy, compassion, or understanding. Unfortunately, 2025, it has become normal to ignore the disabled and elderly communities in Connecticut, and it has become a way of life in the state to think that the elderly and disabled can afford and have easy access to healthcare resources. It should be that in 2025, not one more should have to worry about making life decisions between paying for healthcare, buying food, or affording a place to live. It is time now to stand up in solidarity and recognize there is no price tag to ending discrimination. I said this in 2024, allow me to share this again. I am a Black, disabled Muslim woman who, like many others, is plagued by ongoing discrimination. But I appreciate that as a matter of both moral imperative and constitutional requirements, it is no better to discriminate on the basis of disability than on any other categories of which I am a disadvantaged member. Just like I appreciate this, our white, male, able-bodied governor, who is wealthy and never has had to worry about access to health care, should as well. It is very expensive to be poor in Connecticut. Fist up, smile on, inshallah.
And folks don't know, CJ is really one of the key organizers throughout the last 4 years who organized so many events and so many of the speeches and so many of the actions, and basically organized what made it possible in 23 to actually fix this thing before, as she says, it was taken away.
5 seconds. 5 seconds.
Next is Kathy Flaherty.
Yay.
Also has been part of this battle for years.
Thank you, Sheldon, and thank you everybody for being here today. My name is Kathy Flaherty. I'm the Executive Director of Connecticut Legal Rights Project, and I've been part of the effort to fix Husky C over the last 4 years. And like CJ and Rep. Hughes have referred to, we thought we had a win, at least on the income limit side of things, until that was snatched back and repealed last year. But the other problem, in addition to the income limits that's being addressed by the lawsuit, is the very low asset limits for the Husky C program. Those asset limits were set in the 70s at $1,600 for a single person, $2,400 for a married couple, and the price of life has increased significantly since the 70s, and the asset limits have never been changed. And when we talk about forcing people to live in extreme poverty, to not be able to save for any kind of unexpected expense, and to say to people who may have been on Husky or MedConnect for the working disabled and able to save a little more, well, now that you're retired, you have to deplete all those savings so that you can qualify, hopefully, for Husky C. We need to fix the asset limits too. And there are 2 bills that have been passed out of the Human Services Committee that would do that, but over time. So the question is, you're reducing discrimination, but you're not ending the discrimination. Husky A and D have no asset limits, only Husky C and MedConnect do. But what it would do, it would bring the asset limits up to the 10,000 and 15,000 that are currently the limits for MedConnect. And we hope those bills, even though they have a fiscal note that we'll be responding to, because we think the fiscal note has been placed on those bills, is not realistic, and inaccurate math. And it's just so important for people with disabilities and older adults to have access to health care, and we think that addressing the asset limit discrimination is part of that battle. Thanks.
And last, James Benary Alexander with the Yale Law School Medical Legal Partnership, the third attorney. Just a few words.
Good morning. Thank you to everybody, especially our clients, for speaking out in public and bringing this case. I'm from the Medical Legal Partnership Clinic at Yale Law School. I direct the clinic. We focus the students on representing people with health-harming legal needs. So when people are having trouble with conditions in their housing and it's hurting the family's health, we represent them. When somebody at work is being unlawfully denied leave because they're undergoing treatment, we represent them. When people are denied Social Security benefits unlawfully, we represent them. So when we heard from Sheldon Taubman about the situation with Husky C, we were pretty struck by the basic legal realities here, which is that the state constitution prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities, but the state of Connecticut is deciding to discriminate against people with disabilities. A lot can happen in litigation, but this doesn't seem like even a complicated enough issue for a law school exam. My students couldn't be here today, and rather than standing in the tradition of taking credit for their work, I'm going to instead read a quote from my student Laura Barrett, and this was also in the press release. Stated that a Medicaid recipient who meets the eligibility criteria for Husky D, but who then becomes disabled and as a result becomes eligible for Medicare, will at that point no longer be eligible for Husky D and will not be able to stay on Medicaid if they do not meet the much more restrictive income limits for disabled people under Husky C. So, under the state's discriminatory policy, people can lose access to essential Medicaid services which Medicare does not cover as a result of becoming disabled. Just to repeat that last part. People can lose access to essential Medicaid services which Medicare does not cover as a result of becoming disabled. Again, 2 + 2 = 4. The Constitution says you cannot discriminate against disabled people. However, people can lose access to essential Medicaid services which Medicare does not cover as a result of becoming disabled.
I think we need to hear it.
Message it to people.
All right. I've been instructed to read this a third time. People can lose access to essential Medicaid services which Medicare does not cover as a result of becoming disabled. I think in the current climate, we know Medicaid is under attack, healthcare is under attack, healthcare expertise is under attack. We need to hold ourselves to standards we've already set for ourselves. In the state, we've decided our standards. We will not discriminate against people with disabilities. Let's hold ourselves to that standard.
Thank you, James. James just referred to what's happening on the federal level. Serious threat to the federal funding of Medicaid. Serious threat of cuts to it. And speaking to our leaders here in Connecticut, they've done a great job about speaking strongly to the Trump administration, to members of Congress, saying the states cannot afford cuts to Medicaid. We applaud them for that. We respect them for that. But right here in Connecticut, they can take a stand on something they can directly control. It is totally the choice of Connecticut to choose to discriminate against people with disabilities, and the governor and the legislative leaders can together fix it right here, no matter what happens in Congress. Thank you. And we'll take any questions. For people with severe disabilities who meet the Social Security definition, just to understand what we're talking about. Only people with severe disabilities or who are 65 or older.
And how did the wheels on this sort of start turning? Who reached out to who?
Wheels came off.
I've been a Medicaid advocate for 35 years. And over the years, people will come to us in this bad situation. But I think it really did not come to a head so much until the Affordable Care Act passed the Medicaid expansion and said we're going to cover, instead of those ridiculous, limited silos, people who are low income, we're going to give them Medicaid. And they said, the Congress said, it will be 138% of poverty, and they said no asset limits. And Connecticut was an early adopter of the Medicaid expansion. Now I think 41 states have done the expansion. And that really highlighted, because people who are not disabled who qualify for that program, which is a wonderful expansion, we all support it, but people who are not disabled and qualified for that were in better shape than people with disabilities who had a lower access to health care. And frankly, people with disabilities overall have a greater need for access to health care. So it didn't make any sense. And so people would start coming to us instead.
Part of the discrimination is that our system doesn't believe that people with severe disabilities could earn an income like an able-bodied man. And this is a vestige from that, where earning an income meant, able-bodied work. And clearly we have example A and many, many more of people with all kinds of skills and talents and gifts that want to earn an income, and we punish them. We punish them and say, no, you as a disabled person must be dependent and grateful for this, a little bit of access that we give you. And that is cruel, immoral, wrong, and policy violence.
And my last question, and this one maybe one better served being emailed to me after doing some homework later. I know plenty was said about the bill written up where the protections were removed at the last second by Vermont, and I know there was also mentioned 2 bills passed out of the Health and Human Services Committee this session. Do we have bill numbers for any of those? Would it be possible to get bill numbers?
It's SB 11 and SB 807. SB 11 is a large bill with a lot of things in it.
Yes.
SB 807, I think it's identical, but it's just limited.
And those are for the 2 this session?
Yes.
But we get a fiscal note and they say, oh, it's going to cost $100 million. Really?
Yeah.
There is thousands of people that are eligible, but it's not going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars because they're earning a little bit more. It's just not. The math is wrong. So we're challenging.
And I would just point out that California, in response to your other question, they completely got rid of the asset limits for this project. It had been about the same, $2,000. And their estimate of the total cost of the big state of California, which is 11 times the size of Connecticut, was $107 million to get rid of it entirely. So a fiscal note that says, going up somewhat on the assets in our tiny state is going to $150 million makes no sense.
Let's talk about the dynamic right now. I mean, we're seeing these massive federal cuts and a lot of different threats to the state, and it seems like on some issues, I think that everyone's just trying to sort of play ball with each other right now and figure out a way forward, given that there's a lot of uncertainty. So can you talk about filing a lawsuit like this in that atmosphere? Your decision to move forward with this, given all the other uncertainty about fiscal issues right now?
Sure. I can maybe you want to talk about it as well, or others. You want to address it?
We got to do it all now. Like this is historically the most vulnerable are harmed, and this Trump administration is out for blood, and we got to protect our most vulnerable to that harm, especially now. Now is absolutely the time. We got to do whatever it takes to protect our people and fund our services, period. That's our job. That's our job.
The last 4 years, before the federal and Trump was giving all these threats to Trump's building, what was Connecticut's key step? We got all this surplus. Now all of a sudden they got a new excuse. Before it was the guard leaders. Oh, those people are too expensive, is what he said. Well, you know what? You had all those good years to make these changes. You can't use this as an excuse. Now you have to do it for the real reason now because.
That's right. He's absolutely right. And I just want to say, you know, how do we file a lawsuit in this atmosphere? I say we have no choice.
Yeah.
Because to not file it means that we agree with the discrimination in a situation where the Connecticut Constitution supports our case. So we have no choice but to file it, just to correct this injustice that must be seen. Thank you.
And on this very specific timing, advocates tried every avenue. The bills that you heard about that address the assets and did not address the income limit discrimination. Several of us went to the Capitol and testified specifically, no, we appreciate this, but you got to go further and you have to address the income eligibility discrimination as well, and that was denied. So that's why we're here now, right now.
Really, justice always is forced. Like, really, you know, it's so reluctant. You know, like, really, we don't want to have to, you know, be brought to the table, but this whole civil rights movement forced it by bringing in, we have two branches of power here, the legislative and the executive, and now we need to bring direct action to the third branch of power, which is the courts, and the people. We have to have the people take direct action, hold us accountable, because, you know, we don't do anything unless we're forced to, right? You know, if we had empathy and out of the goodness of our hearts, we would have done this long ago. So the system only changes when it's forced.
And one last thing from the wonky sort of lawyer perspective on this. So under the Equal Protection Clause in our state constitution, there are specific groups that are identified for protection, one of which we've said right from the beginning is people with physical or mental disabilities, right? The Connecticut Supreme Court has said that those groups, when there's a discrimination, they are subject to what's called strict scrutiny, meaning that the state has to have a compelling state interest and there must be no other way if they're going to engage in that kind of discrimination. The courts almost, in Connecticut and elsewhere, almost always invalidate anything on strict scrutiny, so it's so hard, because it's so hard to satisfy that test. One of the reasons is that the courts have said money, the cost of fixing discrimination is never going to satisfy strict scrutiny. And that's why we have such a strong case, precisely because whatever the cost, even though we think the fiscal load on the asset thing is extremely high, it's completely exorbitant, and it's ridiculous. Even if it were accurate, the analysis under the Equal Protection Clause is that it doesn't matter. Strict scrutiny will be applied, and you cannot use cost as an excuse. Thank you.